What's up, everybody? Back once again for another episode of the Stand Up and Laugh audiobook / podcast. I am your host, stand-up comic and author of the Stand Up and Laugh zine, Angelo Gingerelli. And in this episode, we're going to wrap up the 10 best ways to be an asset to a comedy scene. And they include: don't trash the scene. Be proud of what you're doing. Be proud of what your friends are doing. Don't be the guy or girl always making fun of the mic or the show or the podcast or whatever it is. Don't drop the mic. Everybody knows drop the mic is like a cool thing to do if you're on stage at Madison Square Garden. But if you're in a venue, there might only be one mic. And if you drop that and break it, the show's over, so don't be that person. And the last thing I'm going to talk about abiding by, I think, are the two golden rules of stand-up comedy, particularly at a local level, which are be on time and don't be too intoxicated to perform. We're going to each one of those bullet points a little more as we wrap up the top 10 ways you've been asked to a comedy scene. And on the other end of that, we have an interview with the man behind Comedy Fight Club, Matt Maran. Matt grew up in Long Island, does a lot of work in the city, North Jersey, all the tri-state area now, and he's kind of the mastermind behind Comedy Fight Club. So Matt took his love of professional wrestling and his affinity for battle rap and roast battles and turned it into like a circuit all throughout the Northeast area, New Jersey, New York, Pennsylvania, Philadelphia area, where there's rivalries, there's tournaments. One of my best comedy friends, Mark Henley, was recently crowned the roast, the battle roast winner, champion of New Jersey, and it's just kind of a really cool thing they've done. I've done one battle with them. I won the one battle I did, so I'm 1-0. It was really fun, good experience. It forced me to write a little bit more than I normally would about one particular person, and then that's kind of it, man. So on this episode, we have don't trash the scene, don't drop the mic, and abide by 2 golden rules to wrap up our top 10 ways to be an asset to an emerging comedy scene. And right after that, we're going to interview with the man behind the only comedy series I'm aware of that combines professional wrestling, battle rap, and stand-up comedy, Comedy Fight Club, with Matt Maran. Stand Up and Laugh. Build a comedy scene, produce your own shows, and create community by Angelo Gingerelli is available now on microcosmpublishing.com. If you're trying to make your way in the world of stand-up comedy, you can build your career while enlivening your local comedy community and mutually supporting your fellow humorists, and you can even have fun while doing it. Angelo Gingerelli shares his hard-won advice for anyone who wants to create a comedy scene from scratch in a smaller community, carve out their unique niche in a larger city full of professional funny people, or anywhere in between. Lots of good tips here for anyone organizing community events, from how to book venues, get publicity, and avoid drama. Also includes great arguments for starting or joining a comedy scene rather than thinking of yourself as a lone wolf, and solid wisdom for being an asset to an existing stand-up community. Stand Up and Laugh by Angelo Gingerelli is available now on microcosmpublishing.com. Top 10 ways to be an asset to a local comedy scene, Part 3. Number 7, don't trash the scene. The goal of comedy is to make people laugh. Being inappropriate or slightly offensive can be an easy way to make that happen. Trashing the local comedy scene on stage might get a few laughs from the back of the room, aka the other comics, but is ultimately pointless for both the comic and the person show venue they are mocking. There's nothing wrong with some good-natured ribbing at an open mic, and roasting other comics can be a good writing exercise or a fun way to bring the scene together. But attacking the local scene should be one of the few topics that is off limits. This isn't because people are thin-skinned, quote, snowflakes, because sensitivity in comedy is a different conversation. It's because there are people working really hard that have invested a great deal of time and money to create opportunities for comics, and bringing them down makes no sense. Also, nobody cares. No regular person that bought a ticket to a comedy show or happened to be in a bar or an open mic cares that a comic can't get booked on a specific show, that they are not allowed to perform in a certain venue, or that another comic is dating their ex-girlfriend. This stuff is too, quote, inside baseball for casual fans, and too much of it on stage will ensure people don't come back to future shows. A lot of comedy events take place in venues that might not be the most upscale or exclusive locations. Think about it. The hottest club in town that has a line around the block and needs a cash counting machine at the end of the night doesn't need to host an open mic for extra revenue. Don't make fun of these venues. They're giving you an opportunity that the, quote, better places are not, and often the owner is in the room working hard and trying to grow their small business. Meanwhile, you're standing on their stage in their spotlight, talking to their mic, making fun of them. If a solid relationship is there, feel free to have a little fun at the expense of other comics, the host, or the venue. but realize if you cross a line, they have every right to never invite you again. Making fun of stuff is why most people got involved in comedy. But when it comes to the scene that is giving people like you a chance to perform and develop your craft, be careful not to verbally attack someone in a way that might result in less opportunities in the future. Number 8, don't drop the mic. Dropping the mic at the end of a killer set has become such a popular idea that the term is used outside of comedy circles and is often referenced in school presentations, corporate boardrooms, and political debates. The idea of dropping the mic is awesome. However, the practice of dropping the mic is one of the few things nobody should ever do on stage under any circumstances. The one exception to this rule are massive headliners that are selling out huge venues and can afford to break equipment and replace it with almost no impact on their bottom line. A well-timed mic drop can become an iconic moment in a comic's career, and the buzz it generates far outweighs the cost of the actual microphone. But this is not the case in emerging comedy scenes. Most new comics are operating on a shoestring budget, and a broken mic is catastrophic. Some shows and open mics operate with one microphone in the entire building, and if it breaks, the show either ends or comics have to yell their material at the crowd. And I've seen both. The idea of respecting the actual microphone should extend to mic stands, cables, speakers, tables, chairs, and everything else in the venue. Appearing unhinged on stage can be amusing, and being aggressive can be a great persona. But destroying somebody else's property or damaging items that other performers need to perform should never happen. Respect the mic and other people's property, period. Number 9, abide by the 2 golden rules. To say that the morality and code of conduct in the comedy world is somewhat of a gray area is an understatement. However, while the media continues to portray comics as hard-partying degenerates devoid of any moral compass, it becomes increasingly obvious that this, quote, anything-goes mentality also exists in politics, business, sports, and all corners of the entertainment industry as well. While comedy may get an unfairly bad reputation, the fact remains that it's an industry inextricably tied to bars, alcohol, and the party scene. While this world can be a lot of fun, there are 2 rules a comedian should never break. Number 1, be on time. Number 2, don't get too intoxicated to perform. If a comic can be decently funny and follow these 2 rules, they will give themselves a much better chance of success than their peers who cannot live by these 2 pretty simple principles. In almost any other profession, the quote skills of being on time and not showing up drunk or high are the bare minimum requirements to maintain employment. In comedy, they're actually an asset. Even the most talented comics can become worthless to producers and bookers if they have a reputation of being late to shows and causing lineups to be changed at the last minute, making other performers extend their sets to fill their time slots, or forcing shows to end earlier or later than planned. Figure out how long it's going to take to get to a show a few days in advance, plan for unforeseen circumstances, and then plan your travel accordingly. Also, if you're unfamiliar with the area, it's a good idea to ask the person who booked the event about the area so you can plan for issues like parking or traffic ahead of time and give yourself enough time to get to the show. Similarly, there's no problem with a few drinks, but getting belligerent and being disruptive to the show is a recipe for disaster. I've seen funny comics not get booked because they were too hard to deal with and had a history of going on stage in altered mental states, fighting with comics and audience members, destroying equipment, and being a huge liability for the producer or venue. Again, even the most talented people can't overcome the risk they bring to the show if they are constantly intoxicated to the point of injuring themselves or other people. Comedy shows should be viewed as a job, and comics should take them seriously enough to get there on time and cognizant enough to do that job. The Stand Up and Laugh audiobook / podcast. It interviews some of the best names in comedy. We're talking about Chris Gethard, Jersey's own, host of New Jersey's the World, host of the Chris Gethard Show, host of the Beautiful Anonymous podcast. We got Johnny Brennan from the Jerky Boys, a game changer in the 90s, sold millions of albums of prank calls. We got from Arizona, James Petrogallo and Jimmy Wisman, the host of both the Crime and Sports and the Small Town Murder podcast. From the world of heavy metal, we got Don Jameson. He's been on MTV. He's been on VH1. He's on tour with literally every heavy metal hard rock band you ever heard of. From the Dirty South, we got Manny Garavito and Matthew Hahn. From Jersey again, we got John Poverone, one of the finest touring comics to ever come out of the Jersey Shore. From Cleveland, Ohio, we got Jim Tews, made a documentary about Cleveland's comedy scene a couple years ago and been killing it ever since. We got some of the Jersey Shore's finest comics, including Joe Borzada, Eric Hollerbeck, Amalis Perduto, all coming to the game from different angles. From Instagram, we got Selena Kopic, the host and the voice behind the NYT Vows Instagram account. account. And from Comedy Fight Club, we got Matt Maran. The Stand Up and Laugh audiobook / podcast is available now wherever you listen to podcasts, and Stand Up and Laugh is available right now from microcosmpublishing.com. Welcome to another interview segment of Stand Up and Laugh, the book about developing a comedy scene in the community wherever you are in the world. In this episode, we're going to talk to a comedian that has done something very unique. He's from not that far outside, one of the comedy meccas of the world, New York City, but he's really carved out a niche with roast battles that, we know roasting's been around for a long time. Roast battles have happened in the past, but this guy really took it and made it his thing in a way very few comics have latched onto it. So let's welcome Matt Maran. Matt, how you doing, man?
What's up? I'm good. Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, man. I want to talk about a lot about Comedy Fight Club. I've been lucky enough to get booked on one of those and had an absolute blast. You guys came down to the Jersey Shore in early 2021. But let's go back a little bit further. What's your comedy bio? How do you get from, maybe high school, the day you graduate high school to the day you start doing stand-up comedy?
So actually, right out of high school, I was always playing sports my whole childhood, doing amateur wrestling. And I went to college out of Stony Brook in Long Island. While I was out there, I started doing like independent pro wrestling shows. My whole thing was I was going to be a wrestler. It was a good combination of performing and entertaining and also being an athlete. And a few concussions and knee injuries and back injuries later, and I started doing stand-up. And that was during my senior year of college. And then after I graduated, I grew up in Queens. So I just moved back with my family in Queens and started doing stand-up, coming to Manhattan pretty much every day, doing open mics and getting on stage as much as I could.
Let's keep it real. You might get concussions and back injuries doing stand-up, but it's not quite as likely as if you're doing pro wrestling, right?
Yeah, slightly less likely.
I mean, if you get concussed doing stand-up, you're doing something really wrong.
Or something really right, and you pissed off the right person. You never know.
Yeah, that's fair. You're right about that. How long into stand-up are you when the idea for Comedy Fight Club hits?
Probably about 3 years or so. It was about 3 years in. You get to the point after a few years, I feel like I'm one of the better people at every open mic I'm going to, getting booked on shows. I'm doing well on shows, but still nothing's happening. And you wonder, what do I do next? And, I think I was always trying different things and just, try a sketch here, write for this show here, or do this. And just nothing really clicks. And, the roast battle shows had just come to New York. They were doing them at New York Comedy Club in the Stand. And I would go to those. And I always loved the roast before I did stand-up. And the first time I did a friend's birthday roast and had one of the best sets of my life. The roast battles come to New York, and a bunch of people asked me to write for them or do this roast show here, this roast battle here, this roast here. And then me and a friend had an idea for Comedy Fight, because the big club shows, they would just book in the club comedians. And I was still an open micer, and a lot of my friends are open micers. And we just had an idea of, let's book like 7 battles. So there'll be 14 of us there, and call it Comedy Fight Club. And as I started running it and like building it into an actual show, my idea was, there's like the club shows are almost like boxing and UFC. Let's do like the underground pro wrestling version of it. And eventually we like took over the Stand show, and that was Roast Masters. And they stopped doing it. We took over, and we became like the premier roast battle show on the East Coast. And yeah, it's been a wild ride, coming up on our 6-year anniversary now.
So we're 6 years into Comedy Fight Club. How has it changed since the original Comedy Fight Club? What have you done different? What have you learned? What things have stayed from the beginning, and what things have you had to change over the last 6 years?
So from when it very first started, none of us were names that could draw an audience in any way. So I would legitimately, we had nights with 15 battles on the card, just because that'll be 30 people in the audience, and we didn't know if we can draw an audience at all. And as time went on, we would have friends of comedians would come, other comedians would come, and it became like a comedian hangout. And then eventually being on guest digital and all, there were the audience growing is one thing. As far as the actual show itself, just certain things like once you're recording it as a podcast and as a video, there's a big difference between just running a live show and running essentially a television show. You're putting it out for an hour on YouTube. You're watching back. You're noticing I would just scream in a basement like a pro wrestling host. And then things like pulling the microphone away, so when I scream, it doesn't sound too grating into the microphone. The format changed a little bit because certain formats, I think, look better on camera. So a little like technical stuff like that. And just overall, the just quality has gone up as far as, when I first started it, I was a few years into comedy, and it was an anything goes roast battle show. And sometimes anything went, and that went very wrong. People would try doing really fucked up offensive stuff that didn't go well. And I was the host and had to reset the room, recover the room. And it made me a much better comic, I think, because it made me deal with these crazy situations and dealing with hecklers, the whole show was a chaos. So as time went on, I got better at being able to run a show that was a controlled chaos and just having more experience and confidence as a host on the show. And also, as you get more popular and there's more people viewing it, the people who are doing the show take it more seriously. Very early on, people would come and not write any jokes. Now, it's a show that people are preparing for. I remember about a year or so in, the first time I saw someone on stage, their hand was shaking as they were doing the show. And my thought was, I'm like, someone's nervous to do my show, but as time goes on, you just keep doing it, keep building up whatever you're building up, and it can become something.
Hey, man, I'm going to say two things to what you said, see if you agree with these points. When you're hosting a roast battle, and I host a lot of open mics at the Jersey Shore, 1 or 2 a week consistently, right? And I feel like our job as a host in those kind of environments is almost like the referees in a football game. Like, your job is to keep it as controlled as you can, so when a person gets on the mic, they can be chaotic, right? But then but you still have to have them respect the light and put the mic down when it's time to put the mic down and move on. And that's I think that's one of my strong suits as a host of open mics. I control a room fairly well, and I think you definitely control the roast room very well, because that could definitely go left real quick, right? So super props on that. Secondarily, the idea that the person handshaking when they were doing roast at your show, when you guys came to the Jersey Shore in early 2021, you came to a venue that I perform at once to twice a week for the last several years. It's like my home venue, right? It's a block from my house. I love this place. I was sweating profusely all day, and I never get that nervous anymore. And I almost was like, this is cool that I'm getting this pumped up about something again, because like you said before, you're doing shows, you're doing well. It just kind of becomes like you're punching a clock at some point. And this was really something different, right? And I think what I'll say to anybody out there is check out a Comedy Fight Club show, because the energy is unreal. I don't know I've been to a million stand-up shows, and a lot of them are great. I've seen some of the best in the game, but the energy, the only way I can describe it is it's like a mixture between a stand-up show, a pro wrestling event, and an 8 Mile level rap battle all in one place. And everybody's taking it super serious. And the thing I love, and I think you pick the right comics and then you run the room the right way, that I've never seen anybody really get mad at anybody. Have you ever had that where the beef kind of spills outside? Because the person I roast battled is one of my good friends, and we kind of shook hands and hung out, and we talked the other night, actually. We're good friends, but does that ever really happen?
It's rare. Every once in a while it does. Sometimes it may happen between people and I don't hear about it. I know in general with roasting, there was one roast I did like years ago when I went against. I always ask the person I'm facing if there's anything off limits, and I think generally people do that. Say, hey, I had this thing with my mom that is still a little close. Maybe don't mention that. Some people say nothing's off limits, but there was one case where someone told me there was a family thing with their sister they didn't want me to bring up, so I didn't. But I didn't know the person that well, and all I knew was that they were married, so I did a bunch of jokes about them having an ugly wife. Okay. I'd never met his wife before. But yeah, afterwards he was a little upset, but we've talked since. A few weeks later, we were fine. So there, it happens here and there. You generally, going into one of these, you try not to upset anybody. I do look at it more like pro wrestling, where it's two people working together to put on a show, than it is a thing where you're actually trying to hurt people. If I ever actually hurt someone's feelings, it wouldn't be as fun for me doing it. So it's rare. Most people going into it know what they're getting into.
Right, and
every once in a while.
And I'll be honest with you, man, now that I think about it, the 2 battles I've done this year, I've actually, I think, become closer with those guys since the battle. They were kind of like casual acquaintances, and now we're friends, like texting each other and, hanging out to mics and stuff. So, I mean, I think there's there's that kind of thing. Like, you put on a show together, you work together to make something happen, and you guys get closer because of it. Explain to me a little about the business behind what you're doing. How do you pick venues? How do you pick comics? Because most of the Comedy Fight Club roasters are not like everybody knows Jeff Ross is great at roasting, but you're pulling great people out of open mics and local shows and stuff like that. How do you make that happen?
So early on, my mindset kind of for what the business of it to growing it would be, if it even did, because at first it was just like open micers in the basement. We didn't know it was going to become a show that existed for 6 years. But my thought was, I would look back at like old 1990s wrestling. There was WWE, WCW, and then there was a little underground ECW. WWF and WCW had all the big stars. ECW's mentality was kind of, every time someone got big enough there, they would go to one of the bigger companies. So they didn't really build the stars as much and base the show around the stars. The whole thing was you go for ECW. So my whole thing is I'm trying to promote Comedy Fight Club, CFC. There's a lot of people who've done Comedy Fight Club who've since been on TV, who've been on Roast Battle on Comedy Central. We can't really get them to Comedy Fight Club anymore. So as for booking people, I'll book people who I know sometimes through the open mic circuit, through different shows. Other comedians will recommend people for me. I'll have people reach out who are comedians from Philadelphia, Boston, people who are in town for a weekend get recommended. And for the most part, early on, the judging was just the crowd applause. Now we have a judges panel, and generally that's where we can get some bigger names that can maybe be a bit of a draw. But even that, like the old Roast Masters, that was like Louis J. Gomez. He's buddies with Rich Voss and Big J. Okerson. I know them, but I can't text them to come and to do the show. So a lot of it, I think, is just like a lot of the reason people watch on YouTube is just for the bigger names. So I'm still trying to promote this is Comedy Fight Club. And the judges we have are very funny, even if they're not big names yet. Hopefully they will be. And maybe because I have a better relationship with them, that by the time they become bigger stars, I can still get them to come judge. And then that kind of all trickles down to Comedy Fight Club. A lot of the stuff in comedy is just 90% of the stuff you get in the first 10 years of comedy is from other comedians helping you out.
How has Comedy Fight Club impacted your comedy career outside of Comedy Fight Club? Do you get booked on bigger shows? How's it worked? I mean, obviously you're doing Comedy Fight Club a lot, but there's other nights where I'm assuming you're doing regular stand-up. How has one helped the other?
Yeah, certainly you get booked more when you run a show that people see. You're more visible. A lot of times people booking shows, we all know a lot of funny people. It's just kind of who's in your mind. And so if you're running a show that's popular and a lot of people are seeing you at, that can help you. Then I never explicitly done what's called spot trading, where I do book someone on a show. I'm like, well, I'll only book you if you book me on your show. It's a thing that a lot of people do, and I'm probably just in my own head about it, but it feels a little sleazy. So I never really done that specifically, but overall, yeah, if you're booking a popular show and people are seeing you, you'll get more offers to do other shows. And then just recognizability in general. We were doing Comedy Fight Club at the Stand every week for a year and a half. I can now go to the Stand and just hang out. And even if I'm not close with certain people, like a lot of comedians who are much further on, Dan Soder, Big J. Okerson, or guys who I'll see there, Ari Shafir, who I've like interacted with and now have been around. And that doesn't happen if I'm not running Comedy Fight Club.
Yeah, one thing I always say, a lot of open mic comics are always asking more established comics for help, right? Can you put me on your show? Can I be on your podcast? They're always coming with their hat in their hand, kind of asking for help, right?
Yeah.
I think for a young comic to establish something of their own and have that bargaining chip is incredibly valuable, right? Whether it's a podcast, get some listeners, whether it's a show like Comedy Fight Club, whether it's a showcase in your town that maybe that more well-known comic might not have fans there yet. When you come to the game, and instead of asking for help, saying, I can do this for you, if you can do this for me, everybody kind of wins in that. And you're kind of getting closer to being equal with these more established people a little bit quicker. Would you agree?
Yeah, for sure. I think there's always a kind of a mindset of like the dream story someone has of like going to a club and getting discovered and then getting offered all these deals. And there are certainly people who get offered auditions and stuff like that. But after a while of doing it, if you're not getting offered stuff, are you just going to keep waiting around, waiting for something to be offered to you? Or are you going to start your own thing and force people to give you offers? And And
you're one of the few sports guys in comedy. I think you're going to get this reference. Most people think making in comedy is you get on stage, you get on the behind home plate in the bottom of the ninth in the World Series, hit a grand slam, fireworks go off, and now you made it, right? It's a lot more grinding it out in the dog days of August, bunting, sack flies, getting to first base, getting hit by a pitch, striking out. I really to use that baseball example. It's very few people get up to plate the first time and hit that grand slam to win a World Series. The men and women that build long-term careers, they play the season, right? And things, you build a career over time.
Yeah, it's I've compared. It's almost like a much less respected version of a med school or a law school, because at least in those places you're like going to a school, learning, taking tests and stuff. This is just 10 years of being in bar basements and backyards and basically 10 years of bullshit. But whatever that bullshit is you're doing, keep doing it. I remember my first year doing stand-up, I had done a couple talent shows on my college campus. And then that summer, after I graduated, I started doing open mics in New York City and just bombing every night, not knowing if I'm funny, what happened. I did well on this in this college campus, what's going on. And then I went back after a few months, the next fall, to do the same talent show that I had done the year before, and crushed so much harder than I had the year before. And it was like, whatever I'm doing at these open mics is helping. I don't know how or what. The truth is, you just keep getting up and keep failing and keep learning. And even if you don't know what you're learning, you're going to be getting better.
I totally agree, man. I think it's a cliche, but we'll say it again here on the podcast. There's no substitute for hard work and reps. You just, unless you're some preternaturally gifted, almost mutant at stand-up comedy, you just got to do it over and over again. Fail today, succeed tomorrow, fail the next day, and figure it out and keep getting better. I don't think there's really any substitute for that. That being said,
I was just gonna say, even like the guys who are naturally funny, for the most part, outside of like YouTubers or TikTokers, there's very few, one or two comedians you can think of who've like had specials and blown up before their 30th birthday.
That's a very good point. And that's saying, let's say they started at 18, that's minimum 12 years in. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's weird. And the only thing I say is hard to use the Malcolm Gladwell cliche, the 10,000 hour rule. What's tough about stand-up is you can't do 10,000 hours of stand-up at one time. You got to do 5 minutes on Monday, 10 minutes on Tuesday. And that 5 minutes on Monday might take you 2 hours. Like if you live maybe out in Queens and you got to drive to Manhattan to do a spot and then drive back, that's 2 hours of your life and some money for gas tolls, public transportation. And you didn't get 2 hours of work in, you got 5 minutes of work in.
Yeah.
So that being said, what is next for Comedy Fight Club?
So I mean, the pandemic, we were at the stand every week, and then everything was closed during the pandemic. So we were doing backyards, rooftops and stuff. We've been nomading it for the last year or so. We just had our first night back at the stand a couple weeks ago. Looks like got to deal with it now. We'll be doing it once a month. So the shows are still happening weekly. If you follow us on our Twitter and Instagram at Comedy Fight NYC, we have updates about where the shows are going to be, and the YouTube channel, youtube.com/Comedy Fight Club. We're still putting new episodes, full episodes out every week. We're looking to, right now we're doing the stand every month. We're looking to find a venue right now where we can be at the same spot every week. But, moving forward, we're just going to keep doing awesome shows, keep booking new comedians that haven't been on the show before, get some old favorites back. We got Dalton Pruitt and Robbie Goodwin from the Loud Boys are judging almost every week at this point when they're available. And I like them being like my version of house judges. Big J and Voss were the house judges for Lewis, because Lewis has had his long relationship with them that I don't have. But I have that relationship with Robbie and Dalton, who are two of my best friends and two of the funniest comics, I think, in New York, and just two of the funniest comics out there right now. The Loud Boys podcast has blown up. They're going to be doing tour dates with that, so I'm happy to have them on the show. And just, keep watching us. It's one of the only shows out there where you can see all these offensive jokes that we all liked 10 years ago, and now we just pretend we don't like but still secretly do. And Comedy Fight Club is a place where you can still see all that stuff.
Nice, man. And what's coming up for you outside of Comedy Fight Club? What are you doing besides the big show?
I'm still doing stand-up as often as I can. I got the Fifth Borough Comedy Festival coming up. It's the comedy festival the whole Staten Island crew puts on. That's the second week of September they're going to be doing. I'm going to be on a bunch of shows with them. I got the Who's On First podcast. Also, I always forget to plug this when I do things. It's a comedy baseball podcast. It's me, Patrick Haggerty, Anthony Passaretti, three of the few comedians who are sports guys, as you mentioned. It's mostly comic book nerds out here, but we're still trying to keep baseball and sports and a little bit of manliness in comedy for us. Who's on First podcast that comes out every week, also on Spotify, iTunes, wherever you get podcasts.
All right, man. Well, I think that's going to wrap it up, man. You hit all the cylinders. You checked all the boxes. You know everything you know about Comedy Fight Club and Matt Maran. And that's going to wrap it up for this episode of Stand Up and Laugh. Big thanks to Matt Maran for doing the show, and big thanks to Matt Maran for booking me on Comedy Fight Club. It was incredibly fun to be on stage. It's incredibly fun to be in the crowd. Check out a Comedy Fight Club show if it comes to your town. Until next time, I'm Angelo Gingerelli for Stand Up and Laugh.